Trends to watch in 2025, the podcast law edition. Hello, everybody. We start the new year in just a couple of weeks, and intellectual property, data privacy, AI, and even accessibility standards are evolving. And with this episode, I'm going to give you the information you need to keep up. Let's unpack what's happening and how you can protect your podcast and your business so you can achieve maximum impact and influence. Stick around. Hey there, podcasters. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and this is Legit Podcast Pro. If you're a podcaster looking to build a thriving, sustainable show, you are in the right place. And today, we are tackling some top legal trends that you need to keep an eye on in 2025. It's kind of a big episode, so grab a beverage of choice or maybe a notebook, and let's just jump right in. First off, protecting your intellectual property in what will likely become a less regulated America. Let's start with this. Intellectual property, IP. In recent years, we've seen some sectors of U.S. law move toward deregulation, and especially with our incoming presidential administration, it seems likely that will continue. So what does this mean for podcasters? Well, it means protecting your creative work is more important and even more on your own shoulders than it has ever been before. If you are producing original content, whether your episodes, show artwork, your podcast title, you got to secure those rights. And here is how you do that. First off, copyright in your episodes. Good news is you own the copyright the moment you create something original. But copywriting and registering ensures that you can do something about it if there's an infringement and that they're recognized as your creations. Secondly, you need to consider trademark for your brand. Your podcast title, logo, tagline, those kinds of things are what make your show recognizable and connects the content that you make to you as its source. Trademarks protect against confusion that could arise from the use of similar names by others in the marketplace. Why is this important? Well, because if somebody steals your content or adopts that confusingly similar brand name, well, you're going to need these registrations in place so you can take the legal action required, because without them, you might not have as much legal recourse. So here's the pro tip. Be proactive. Don't wait until you discover that someone has come into your backyard to compete or copy. Take care of it ahead of time. Second, number two is that there are changes afoot at the U.S. trademark registration system, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Changes in especially the costs. They're going up in a couple of weeks. January 17th, I believe, is the date. And the process is going to be a little more complicated. They're changing up the registration system's website and things like that. And what that means is that for podcasters, it is essential to jump on this now before those costs go up, or budget accordingly for trademarks later on. Example, if your show's name is unique and you are building a brand around it, you want to make sure you own that trademark. Waiting too long leaves you vulnerable to those that would copy, or a legal dispute, or someone who puts out something with a similar title but doesn't live up to the quality that people have come to expect from you, and that can hurt your reputation. So start early and consider working with a professional like myself to navigate the process efficiently. Trend number 3, contracts. Rock solid relationship deals, podcast prenups. If you work with co-hosts, producers, or editors, you need clear agreements, what I like to call podcast prenups. These are contracts that spell things out, things like ownership of who owns it. Is it shared, or does one person control the rights? How are profits going to be divided? What's the compensation structure? Who gets what percentages of revenues? Those kinds of things. Roles and responsibility. Who's in charge of editing, booking guests, marketing, those kinds of things. And without these agreements, disputes can and do arise, especially when the money starts to flow. And trust me, these disputes get messy and expensive very quickly. So protect your podcast and your relationships with solid contracts from the start so you don't have to incur all those expenses. When there's a contract, it becomes the roadmap for the deal and potentially the solution if the deal isn't going the way it's planned. Next up, consent. With stricter data privacy laws coming into fashion around the world, podcasters need to be careful about how they handle listener data. If you are collecting email addresses or using certain analytics or running targeted ads, you need to disclose how you're using the information that you gather. Here's the kinds of things you can do. First off, be as transparent as possible. Clearly explain your data collection practices in the privacy policy on your website. You do have a privacy policy on your website, don't you? If not, that's priority one. Next up, get consent. Don't assume that folks are okay with you collecting data from them. Explicitly ask for their permission. Offer opt-outs. Make it easy for listeners to say no thanks to the data collection. We've all seen those cookie consent buttons and those consent agreements. Failing to comply with these laws can lead to hefty fines, and it's just plain old bad practice. So review your data practices regularly to ensure compliance. I'm going to let the dog out. I didn't know she was in here. All right. Well, consent isn't just about listener data. You need consent from your guests as well. Consent to the recording might be implied because they've showed up for the interview. But what's the scope of what you're allowed to do and for how long? Are they getting paid? What if you release in another format or medium or platform? What if you repurpose the content into a book or a course or something else? Well, all of these ambiguities can really be a problem if a guest decides to stir things up. So it's super important to get an airtight release agreement from every guest who appears on your show. I call this practicing safe guest. Use a release every time, every guest, and you stay safe. Fortunately, I have a free lawyer-drafted guest release template available for you. Just visit podcastrelease.com and it's yours. All we need is an email address so we can send it your way. All right. Intellectual property rights management. This is about more than just protecting your own IP. It's about respecting people other than yourself who have IP that you want to use. If you're using music or sound effects or video clips in your show, you need the appropriate licenses. Using that copyrighted material without permission can lead to takedowns or lawsuits. So always double check that you have the rights to any third-party content you use and keep track of that. Keep those licenses on file. And be wary if you get a license that has the words single use associated with it. That means that if you use that clip more than once, you pay more than once. So another thing to be wary of is the Creative Commons license. That could allow you to use material for free, but usually with conditions. There's the share alike requirement, which means that you would have to license your show that uses that material on the same basis for free and maybe with or without attributions. That's just not something that I would recommend. Another trend is advertising disclosure and compliance. Sponsorships and ads are a great way to monetize a podcast, but there are important rules that you have to follow. And in 2025 and beyond, it is likely that we will see more enforcement in the influencer space. And yes, podcasters and YouTubers, well, we're influencers, at least in the eyes of the regulators. The Federal Trade Commission here in the US requires clear and conspicuous disclosure of any sponsored or supported content. If you are paid to promote a product or services, your listeners need to know. And the same is true if you get the goods for free so you can review them or just to use and talk about. Any of that kind of stuff. Transparency really is what builds trust with your audience and keeps you compliant with the law. Trend number 7, this is one I've talked about a few years ago and starting to gain some traction with folks. Accessibility. Making your podcast accessible isn't just the right thing to do, it is a legal requirement in many instances. Providing transcripts or ensuring that your content is compatible with assistive listening technologies can help reach a wider audience and stay compliant. So pro tip, add transcripts to the workflow. It's actually a lot easier than you think, and it makes your content much more searchable as well. Now, trend number 8 has to do with the use of artificial intelligence in content creation. These AI tools these days are amazing for podcasting, but they also create some real legal gray areas and no-fly zones, essentially. For example, who owns the content generated by the AI? Well, the current view in most countries' copyright agencies is that nobody owns it. If it isn't human-generated, it is not eligible for copyright protection, and that means anyone can come along and use the content that you had the AI generate and use it without any penalty or obligation to license from you. Another question, does the AI tool have the proper licenses for the data it uses and is trained on? This is the other side of the coin. You could actually be liable if you use an AI tool and the material that it generates is too similar to something that it was trained on, other material. If you put that AI generated copied material in your show, now you will find yourself in the crosshairs of an infringement lawsuit as well. Now, podcasters just need to establish ownership and ensure that their tools aren't infringing on anyone else's rights. You cannot rely on blind faith here. I'm predicting this is where we're going to start seeing real trouble for creators in the new year. So research the AI tools that you use and document the ownership structure of things, and do the best you can to make sure that they're not infringing in the way they're trained. Trend number 9 is defamation, content liability. Now, bold topics definitely make for great podcast episodes, but they also carry risks. Saying something inaccurate, false, and harmful about someone, that could lead to a very costly defamation lawsuit. Just recently, ABC News, a major media company where everybody is well trained on this kind of stuff, they settled a big lawsuit for defamation, and they're paying millions and millions of dollars. If it can happen to them with all that training and safeguards and lawyers on staff that they have in place, what could happen to you, an independent creator or a small network or something? You've got to verify the facts that you recite in your show and avoid making unsubstantiated claims. That goes for claims made by your guests as well. Make sure you can verify it or cut it out. Liability insurance is also a good idea. I will be doing an episode in the new year on podcast insurance, so stay tuned for that. We'll get to the information you need. Now, trend number 10 is to do with global distribution and jurisdictions. Podcasts reach listeners worldwide, and that means that you're subject to laws in multiple places. For example, Europe has very strong privacy laws, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, content restrictions in some countries, labeling requirements for explicit content or adult themes, plus the laws of defamation and privacy are different and often stricter in other countries. So you have to be careful, especially if your guests, your subjects, or your audience are located overseas. So research the laws where your biggest markets are and adjust your practices accordingly. If you've got lots of listeners in a particular country or guests from a particular country, it's important to understand what you're dealing with there. Now, the last two trends are sort of combined. They are FTC rules, Federal Trade Commission rules, dealing with social indicators and misleading advertising information. The FTC is cracking down on inflated or misleading audience metrics. Faking downloads, unique listeners, or engagement stats to attract sponsors is illegal, and it can result in fines of up to almost $52,000 per violation. So keep your stats honest and legit, and avoid buying those fake followers or reviews. Just don't do it. Finally, look, that's it. These legal trends aren't just abstract rules. They are practical steps that you can take to protect your podcast, grow your business and your audience, and achieve the kind of impact you're after. Staying ahead of these changes is how you build a podcast that lasts. Now, if you need our help, I should say, getting your podcast legal house in order, visit thepodcastlawyer.com and schedule a free consultation. Or if you're more of the do-it-yourself type, check out the resources we have over at Easy Legal for Podcasters. And if you just want the forms, podcastlawforms.com, where we have lots of great resources that you can use so you have the confidence that you're getting things right and can take those big, bold steps to make your show amazing. So that's it for another episode of Legit Podcast Pro. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and I'll see you again really, really soon. Merry Christmas.